that's it, for the sake of treasuring the dialogue of today and you know, using it for future opportunities and making it available to a wider audience who could not connect this morning. So I would like to now turn to our next speaker, and we are very pleased to welcome a very dear partner of JESC in the name of SIDSE. Our next speaker is Mrs. Josiane Gauthier, the Secretary General of SIDSE. SIDSE is an international family of 18 Catholic social justice organizations in Europe and North America, whose secretariat is based in Brussels, and it lobbies European and international institutions for greater global solidarity and systemic change to end poverty and inequalities. Inspired by Laudato Si, SIDSE's main areas of work include corporate accountability and human rights, climate justice, alternatives to extractives, resilient food and energy systems, and promoting sustainable lifestyle. So it is my great pleasure to introduce you Mrs. Josiane Gauthier, SIDSE's Secretary General. Josiane is a Canadian lawyer with over 25 years of experience in international development and solidarity, with a strong focus on human rights, children's rights, social justice, and faith-inspired advocacy work. She has been Secretary General since 2017. Before this, she led the public engagement, advocacy and campaigns teams at Development and Peace, Caritas Canada, where she spent several years working on a broad array of issues in the field of international development and policy. With SIDSE, she has been actively involved in networks and actions focusing on climate justice, systemic change, and promoting sustainable lifestyles. She is also passionate about engaging youth on issues of social justice and integral ecology, and communicating about personal commitment and justice to broader audiences. In October 2019, she participated in the Synod on the Amazon on behalf of SIDSE. So Josiane, the floor is yours, and I think you will tell us about the SIDSE's commitment and advocacy on corporate responsibility and due diligence, environmental and human rights due diligence. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Adriana, for that very complete introduction. It's a little intimidating to hear yourself presented in that way. Expectations become very high all of a sudden, but I'll do my best. I'm very happy to be with you. Thank you for the invitation. It's always interesting and challenging for us to put ourselves in conversation a little bit outside of our realm, to be at a table with different perspectives. So that's what I hope I can bring, and I can also get out of the conversation. So I come here with that, with an open mind and heart, but I do come with the messages of the work that we're doing as SIDSE to contribute to the reflection. The title about, the dialogue between business and earth is interesting because I've asked myself a lot, and we've questioned ourselves on what are the conditions for dialogue. And for a true dialogue, we need to pay attention to who is speaking and who is listening and how we're listening. Are we prepared to change our perspectives, or are we defending a position? This is always a huge challenge, isn't it? And are we defending our views, or are we open to a reflection? So it's a challenge we pose to all of ourselves. Profound listening and humility is always required if we really want to establish a dialogue. But it's also difficult because we need some kind of equal footing to have a dialogue. And that's even more challenging because of some of the things that Edmund just shared about the immense power of some actors in certain situations. It's extremely difficult to have a proper dialogue, to set the conditions for that to really take place. And it's a challenge for ourselves because of the disproportionate power we play just from being highly educated, from coming from wealthy countries, all of our perspectives, the privileges and advantages that we come to the conversation with always create a little bit of an imbalance. So it's something we have to be really conscious of when we talk about the importance of dialogue. And especially when we're talking about situations such as these, such as corporations who are acting around the world. And this is something that CITSE works particularly on, is transnational corporations, of course, and the regulations and the defense and the protection of human rights and environmental rights of people and communities and of the earth around the world. So that being conscious of that disproportionate power is very important in the reflection and looking at the problem and also looking at the remedies. As CITSE, of course, I'm sharing a perspective which is very specific to our own experience, and that's what I'm bringing about sometimes a very unhealthy relationship that we've seen between business and the earth and business and communities around the world. So there are some really sad and tragic examples, and it's important to learn from those and to try to build up something different and imagine a different world after we've acknowledged some of the harm that's happened and that keeps happening, that we're somehow, unfortunately, indirectly complicit with, because we are consumers, because we are part of the systems that benefit from the establishment of this economic model. And so it's not only a challenge to specific actors, it's a challenge to all of us as part of that reality and part of that world and that system that we all work and function and live in and benefit from, directly or indirectly, of course. The example that, of course, comes to mind a lot, and one that we've worked with very much, as CITSE, is the case of Brumadinho. So for those who are not familiar with Brumadinho, it was the collapse of a dam in Brazil in 2019, and it killed 272 people from the collapse of the dam, leading to massive destruction and mudslides across villages. And all of this came from a mine that was set up, and it was iron and ore mine. So there was the ecological damage, of course, which was devastating, but there's the human cost as well. And it's an ongoing human cost because there's trauma. There's trauma to the land and there's trauma to the people and to the communities who did not feel they were on some kind of equal footing that could have defended themselves in that situation. So it was really a sad but excellent example of where there was not the kind of responsibility or the setup or the legislative installation to protect people and communities and to be able to control in a way the abuses or the excessive behaviors maybe that came out of that particular mine. And there's the impunity because there is no legislative setup. In the case like that, there's the impunity afterwards. So it's the effect of not only having hurt communities and people and the land, but then having no recourse, having no way of asking for reparation, in a just way. So there's the sense of injustice, which is very, very deep, and also part of the human experience, which causes further and longer lasting suffering for all of us. And then you need to look at the causes. And that was one particular case, but it's a very traumatic case. And of course, Father Edmund mentioned the economic system, and this is present in Laudato Si. There's a questioning, a very important questioning there about the economic system, which allows or enables or even favors this type of enterprise to act with impunity and to be able to cause so much damage that there was no prevention possible in that particular case. And the growth and the extractivism of it. So the extractivist side of it is something we've looked at quite a bit as CITSE, which is almost a system in itself within the economic system, which is Edmund spoke of harnessing the resources, but when we've looked at it in conversation with people, there's been a deep questioning about the taking. So it's all in the attitude, it's all in the approach, and it's all in the philosophy that resources are for the taking and for the consuming and for the throwing away. So really connecting it to the throwaway culture, which we've read about in Laudato Si. And we've seen that the same perception of how resources can be used and transformed and thrown away, causing damage, is the same attitude that we've seen applied to our relations with human beings. So communities are also, and people are also consumed and used as a resource that we can extract and throw away. So this is a very important spiritual question about how we treat each other and how we treat the earth and how we can repair that. How do we overcome that, not just with laws, but there's a deep transformation that's going to be required, of course, to move past this logic of use and utilization and throwing away, and a completely non-circular approach, of course, to growth. So these are some of the questions that have been raised. The other element that came up in the interesting case of Brumadinho, is what is our relation to other cultures? What is our relation to other traditions? How is it that one economic model could so disregard also the value that maybe certain communities or peoples would apply to the nature around them, how sacred it is for them, how sacred the land is for them, how trees and earth and minerals are not just for the taking, but maybe they're there to exist by themselves. They don't need to be extracted, maybe, or do we actually need them? So there's a questioning there even of the approach that we have, and are we open to reflecting on another way of looking at our transactions, of our relationships with nature in a non-only utilitarian way. So what is the sacredness of the resources, of the earth, of the creation itself? Of course, we see, as you mentioned in the introduction, Adriana, that we're faced with a very short-term set of important decisions about climate, about the way we are behaving collectively towards the earth, and the rapid problems and degradation of our environment, all through human behavior, of course. And so we have many elements to this, accelerated, of course, by some very fast-paced and aggressive economic models of growth and business in some parts of the world, and in many that act outside of their own territories as well. So we've looked at these and said, what can we do to remedy this? And you were talking about the solutions being simple or complex. That's a good question. There's legal remedies, there's legislative processes that we can promote, and that's something that we are doing. There are a lot of initiatives. Of course, there's the UN binding treaty to try to ensure respect for human rights and environmental rights, and environmental rights defenders' lives as well, because there's a great threat to environmental rights defenders right now who are going up against very powerful interests. There's also a push for stronger legislation at the European level that we're working on at CITSE, just one of many actors. Of course, we're a collective of people. And we're trying to do this in a spirit of listening to the communities that are most affected by the business behavior. Because, as I mentioned, there's an insidious sort of element underneath, which is when it happens far away from home, are we paying as much attention to it? And it's a very simple thing to say, but actually it's very unconscious at times, that something extremely far away from home feels less lethal, feels less dangerous, feels less damaging if we don't see the pain right around us. And do we put the same value on that voice, on that impact, and that perception and that perspective? So in the European context, it's a big challenge, because to regulate within Europe is one thing, but to regulate within Europe, recognizing Europe as an actor in the world, is a different variable that needs to be taken into consideration, and the responsibilities of all of these corporations that act outside of their own territories. I won't go into the details of the legislation. I just wanted to sort of share that these are some of the initiatives that we're working on, of course, and there are limits, because the definitions are not going all the way into all business activities. Of course, it stays at a very top level. There's a struggle to be ambitious enough to make those changes fast enough, of course. And there's a big question about intention or about political will. We talk about businesses, but there's political will as well that needs to go hand in hand with this. And we've seen sometimes that politicians might be slower even to act than some initiatives coming even from the business sector. So there needs to be a little bit more alignment there in the conversation about whose interests we're actually working with and for. And it's all of our interest is the bottom line. As you said, in that sense, it's quite simple. It's about all of us. When I was younger, I remember we used to speak about environmental disasters. We'd see them on the news and they were quite shocking. And we would only look at them from the perspective of, there was an oil spill and it went onto the shores and it damaged the lives of some birds, and it seemed quite distant from us. I think we've learned in the past few years with Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti to bring that quite a bit closer to us and to realize that we are part of this, and that whatever we are doing, whatever damage that we are somehow part of, is our own lives and our own futures. And there's intergenerational justice that has to be considered as well. It is not our right to destroy things today, which will no longer be there tomorrow. We cannot take opportunities away from future generations as well. So deep questions, lots of challenges. We're working on stronger legislation, but there's probably a much deeper conversion that we're looking at that needs to happen, a transformation of the heart. Business is a human activity. Therefore, we have to work on the human in that discussion. And the human beings involved in this practice need to also feel conscious and responsible and collectively interdependent of each other. And this is maybe the work that we need to do together as faith actors, is to make that connection really clear between us of our interdependence and our need for each other. Yes, so we can regulate activities, we can change laws, we can ensure access to justice, we can have punitive measures, we can have compensation. But at the end of the day, I think the first important step is really this transformation and this conversion and this recognition of us needing to work together and be together. And why are we making these changes? What is the value that we're looking to transform? And of course, at the end of the day, are we listening? So that's all I wanted to share for now.
Wow, thank you, Josiane. I think it's you now who left me speechless, in fact, as all you've said really comes from your experience, I know, from your listening work and attitude. And I'm very grateful you have brought into that perspective that, even beyond our own advocacy, advocacy is our job, but there is more than that. There is not only about introducing new legislations and new policies, which are very necessary, of course, and as very true enablers of change. But deeper than that, as you said, there is a true need of transformation and change of our own human conscience. So thank you very much for setting forth these points that we will surely address later on in the dialogue we're going to have. It is now my pleasure to then host our next speaker. And I would like to introduce him as we are sort of moving to a different actor of this dialogue. So I would like to introduce him now by reminding a little bit ourselves of what Laudato Si sees as imperative. Laudato Si sees it imperative to promote a new vision of the economy capable of taking into account ecological concerns. It really speaks about the need for an economic ecology that is capable of appealing to a broader vision of reality. And as it says, an integral ecology demands a new conception of the economy in which production of wealth improves our world rather than destroying it. What the world needs, says Laudato Si, is a circular economy model capable of reversing the trend and eliminating social exclusion and environmental devastation. So this is what, this is the message and the call of Laudato Si for a new kind of economy. We have to say that the business reality is often not fully known or very well known, especially when discussing environmental action, because businesses operate within certain constraints of financial nature, of legal nature, of private or political interests, which limit their agency to do good and the function of production. So I would like to now turn to our next speaker with this question: how can business actors transform and become leaders of ecological transition? And the next speaker is Mr. Enrique Meroño Sierra, who is the global head of quality and new initiatives within the Innovation, Sustainability and Quality Division, which since 2016 is part of the chairman's office at Iberdrola company. Before that, Mr. Enrique worked for over 10 years in different management roles in the generation business. He holds an industrial engineering degree from ICAE School of Engineering, Universidad Pontificia de Comillas in Spain, and a global energy MBA from the University of Warwick in the United Kingdom. Now, Enrique, we look forward to listening to you. Please.
Thank you very much, Adriana. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much also for this great introduction and challenge from my side. I will try to do my best with humility, because I want to be humble enough in order also to show what it's the path that we are involved in the company, but also what is the missing pieces in this puzzle as well. So let me try to share with you a brief presentation. Just a brief presentation of the company, just to let you know, if you are not familiarized with Iberdrola, we are an electric utility company. We have presence in more than 25 countries worldwide, but with the global headquarter, the group headquarter is in Bilbao, in the Basque Country in Spain. But we have significant presence mainly in 5 big regions in the UK, with the name of Scottish Power subsidiary, in the USA with the name Avangrid, also in Mexico and in Brazil, and of course in Spain. Well, the numbers of the figures of the company, it's in the slide. I don't want to get into this detail. Maybe you are aware about what means a megawatt, maybe you're not. It's not, I think, the right place in order to tackle these kind of things, but just to give you a brief, picture of what we are. As you can see, the purpose and values of the company, I think it's very much aligned of Laudato Si's spirit in some way. This is something that applies to all the company, because one of the things that I'm going to try to explain right now, it's that we are focusing on delivering and on to being an enabler, not just performing a business as usual activity. And this is something that I think is a little bit unique of this company, because we focus in the last 22 years in part of the solution, not just in part of the problem. Of course, we are part of a system, of the electricity system, and this is something that is part of the context. But what we are dealing in the company, and we are working on, very thoroughly, it's about change, and we focus all our activities in these 22 years in focusing increase our renewable energy sources, focusing also in what I call energy efficiency solutions. And let me explain what I mean with energy efficiency, because maybe some of you understand the term, but maybe some of the public, they don't understand the term correctly. Energy efficiency, what I'm trying to explain is that a good energy efficiency process is something that you are using less resources to creating the same good. So we are focusing in helping our customers to be more efficient, and that means that we are focusing to, being honest, sell less electricity, but trying to be part of the solution of the issue that we are talking about, and not being part of the problem. So smart grid is part of that. Electric mobility, smart solar with these solar panels at home, even green hydrogen for these high consumption industrial processes, heat pumps. we are focusing in trying to give and provide solutions to the customers with better energy efficiency, basically. And that anticipation, I think, from our perspective of the company, implies that Iberdrola has grown sixfold in size, talking about market capitalization these 22 years. So I think that right now the situation is completely different that if we compare with 2000, because right now I think that the awareness of the society of the big problem, a big mess, and the importance of Laudato Si to highlight the big troubles that we are, I think that implies that also some kind of change of points of view in the market. Well, I think that we are in a better position to change things now than probably 20 years ago. I'm going to pass this very quickly, but just to show that we have certain programs like Electricity for All, that it's a problem that we have the target to bring electricity to 16 million people by 2030, which is not just a special program because it's embedded in the business as usual activity of the company. So we have presence in Mexico and we have presence in Brazil, and in those countries we are working closely with also the authorities, the governmental authorities, in order to help and to promote these kind of investments. Also through our Perseo venture capital company that we have, we are not just investing in cutting edge technology, but also in cutting edge business models that helps to bring to the people in poverty this electricity and resources. So just to show that it's part of also of our business activities on a daily basis as well. But and this is more personal perspective that we foreseen during this process of change that we started in 2000, was that in disruptive changes, for example, renewable energy, for example, electrification of transport that we are facing right now in a massive way, most of the players in the sectors induce negative impact in their business. So that makes a big noise because of the conflict of interest, a status quo bias with a present continuous approach. And it's something that it put a break in the change. It's natural, it happens to everybody. We decided in our company, we decided instead of try to stick in the business as usual situation in 2000, to be part of the change, to be part of the new wave. And we detected that some of our, the other companies in different sectors they experience it something similar than the stages of grief. So they first started with denial, then with anger, then with bargaining, then depression, and then acceptance. And at least from the stage of bargaining, I think that what we need really here, it's a new language. And a new language to represent the consensus of all parties to address the system failures. That, for example, Adriana said that in the opening speech about externalities. That's the main issue for us because, for example, Europe decided, not Europe, also I think other places, other regions in worldwide, they decided to create emission trading system for the CO2 in order to put a cost and a value for something but which is bad for the society, but the systems are not working right. Their systems are starting. Of course, in the last 20 years, we're starting with the idea of polluter pays principle in order to push regulation forward changes, which obviously is not enough, because if you have enough money to pay, you pay and that's it, and you continue creating pollution. So it's not the solution to polluter pays, but it was the first step in the right direction. So What happens with the particles emitted from the car tailpipe emissions? What happens to that? So we need to create, we need to include that in the real economy, to include that in the indicators of business, in the regulations of the countries, in order to create a real change, a real action change. Because if I want to know what is the value change of a supplier, because I want to choose the right supplier for certain service or product that I want to achieve, I need to measure in certain way if he's right in human rights, and he's doing right in the way that they extract the raw materials. And we are in the middle of the path in order to create this new language that is going to help us to move forward and to create a big change, basically. The change that we really need, because we are in an urgent phase. For example, the term ESG, environmental, social, and government, is new language. It's something that 20 years ago nobody talked in that way, but we created indicators, we created measures, we include that in our language and include that in our business models in order to be aware about that and to take care of these kind of things in our business decisions. So we are trying to incorporate that in this way. So just to end and sum up, there's a lot of challenges that we are facing. For us, the political will is something really important. The clarity, the rule of law, and the stable regulation. Maybe not only attractive, but just stable enough time in order to think about the right way to invest and the right way to move forward. Avoid externalities, include that in all the structure and the new language that we need to move forward. And of course, simple administrative procedure in order to do new things, because sometimes the problem is also relies on permitting, which is something very, very strange. But we are facing a lot of issues in different countries regarding permitting. So that's it from my side, for the opening speech, and looking forward for a fruitful discussion later. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Enrique. I think it was really interesting for all of us to really look at this issue from the eyes of the business and what it entails for a company who is willing to change, but then has to face a number of obstacles of various orders. You have explained, in fact, the resistance within the business community to talk in this new language, to come to a different consensus, but also the external constraints and the changes that are necessary to enable change from in the business way of doing. I like especially what you said about being at middle way. You are like in the middle, how do you say, the maillot, in the middle chain, and you can actually determine how the value chain will continue, will progress. And you have the power, meaning the business companies, have the power to monitor sustainability observance on behalf of their suppliers. So they do have a role, they do have an influence within the value chain itself. So thanks again. I would like to already invite all the attendants to, if they wish, to ask for questions in the chat of this platform, of this Zoom platform. You can please feel free to start throwing your questions, according to the speeches you've already heard so far. We will address them in the following open Q&A session. But before that, we are still to listen our fourth and last speaker, who will also address us for 10 minutes to give his introduction. Before then, we enter into a more detailed dialogue. And our fourth speaker is Mr. Cédric Pacheco from the Laudato Si Foundation in London. He's talking about the world of finance. And Laudato Si has actually quite harsh words about finance, to the extent it really dominates or dictates the economy and the markets. The technocratic paradigm, speculation, and the thirst for short-term profit are harshly criticized by Laudato Si, which says that the search for profit as an end in itself is also realized through investments which do not contribute to the real economy and are based on unreliable financial products and on high price variability. Laudato Si also criticizes the growing gap between access to credit for those who do already have capital, who do already own it, so the wealthiest, to the detriment of those who do not have such access because they are too disadvantaged. So considering the interconnections between the economic, financial, ecological, and social aspects of the world of today, how can a new paradigm for development come to existence, whereby investments are made towards a healthier vision for the future, where the common good can prime in financial policies and regulatory frameworks can be adopted for a global financial system which can be at the service of the real economy, of human work, and of the environment? I would like to ask this compelling question to Mr. Cédric Pacheco, who is a program manager at Laudato Foundation in London, where he is responsible for designing and delivering the Foundation's EU financial policy and regulation program by identifying, supporting, and scaling policy interventions that address the threat of climate change and incorporate social equity. Prior to that, Mr. Pacheco worked in the financial industry for 9 years, focusing on European financial regulations and public affairs at the Association for Financial Markets in Europe and in various positions in equities capital markets at Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and New York Stock Exchange, Euronext. Now, the Laudato Foundation responds actually to these two crises, the inequality and the climate breakdown crisis, by supporting action that inspires and challenges the industry to harness its power for good. The Finance and Capital Market Transformation Program aims at shifting the global economic system so that every euro invested in capital markets take into account its impact on all people and nature through collaboration with industry, policymakers, investors, thinkers, and NGOs. So, Cédric, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adriana, for this introduction and for inviting Laudato Foundation to the discussion. And it's great to be here with all the participants and the panel participants. So engaging with businesses for Laudato is at the center of our strategy. And while we think it's a necessity to engage with the businesses, our experience show two different things. So the first one is that it's very important to analyze the how we engage with companies. Should we engage directly with them, or is there a common denominator that we can use? And Adriana, you used the financial system and the financial sector, which is much more concentrated. How can we use this sector to harness and influence business, which is owned by the financial institutions? And the second sort of conclusion of our experience is that it is necessary to engage with business, but it's not sufficient just to engage with business. Could the behaviors and the practices of the companies be actually a consequence of the economic system they are operating in? And so just to illustrate what I mean, I'd like to talk a bit about what we do at Laudato Foundation and why we came to create it. So the Laudato Foundation was created, as Adriana said, to respond to the convergence of the two global crises, inequality and climate breakdown. And prior to the Laudato Foundation 2 years ago, that we founded 2 years ago, the CNA Foundation focused in making the fashion sector a force for good. But after 5 years, looking at the fashion sector, we look at ourselves and we realize that the issues in the fashion industry were just a reflection of what was happening at the systemic level. So we actually created Laudato Foundation to keep leveraging our expertise in this industry, while at the same time we added another industry vertical on the built environment, because just in Europe, buildings are responsible for 40% of our energy consumption and nearly 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So that's an industry that we need to be engaged in. But as I mentioned earlier, so we wanted to make sure that we could act and deliver at the more systemic level. So we've also added one cross-cutting program that Adriana just mentioned, which is the Finance and Capital Market Transformation Program. And because the overall economic system operates under the assumptions that, you know, resources are infinite and the costs of growth and competitiveness can be done at the expenses of people, like in Josian's example of the dam, you know, the balance between the people, the nature, and the profits, you know, is broken. So it must be reestablished in some way. And to achieve that, we have three, you know, main areas of intervention which allow us to sort of cover a wide range of actions. So as a consequence, we hope can result in changes in how the business operate. So the first type of intervention is to mobilize financial institutions and industry players to change their investment practices, to find new ways of working together toward the compliance of the Paris Agreement and social equity. And to do that, and to do this, actually, we develop standards and commitments in collaboration with investors, such as the science-based targets initiatives on the build sector, the Investor in Industry Global Alliance on Climate Change, with a number of investors. But that's not sufficient. So we need to hold investors to account. So we have investors that are beginning to show leadership, like Iberdrola. Sometimes their ambition is tempered by, you know, commercial concerns and the norms of the system. So the external stimulus from external organization is really needed to raise the ambition and drive accountability. And we also have a debt cluster, which concentrates in its attention on the neglected topic of the corporate bonds, which are really driving the oil and gas industry investments. So that's one side of engaging with investors, the banks, and industry. And the second intervention is that we also understand that the voluntary commitments and the actions of the corporates or the financial institutions are not enough. And which is why we also actively support initiatives that aim to create a change in policy, regulation, taxation that will help accelerate this fair transition. And to do that, we need to create, you know, we help create the sustainable finance framework, and especially in Europe, there's been in discussion for the past 7 years. And there's a lot of good work on, you know, on more reporting or better reporting by the companies to the financial institution, but this is not enough. We need to make sure that the reporting from the companies are actually being used effectively by the financial institutions, and that those financial institutions can allocate the capital accordingly. These transition plans, the ability of the companies to live towards this just transition system, and in turn that the supervisors of the financial institutions can hold accountable the banks that provide lending, or the other institutional investors that provide equity or other products to the companies. And that also requires, you know, building an effective and transparent influence. So I understand that, you know, Father and Grace previously mentioned the power of influence. And we're working with organizations such as, you know, Influence Map, that highlights the realities of corporate lobbying that are at odds with the commitments that are made by the companies. So finally, our third point of intervention, and because we are acting at the systems level, we're actively working in developing what we call the new economics thinking. And because there's a general consensus that what is valued and measured as prosperity, like, you know, the GDP, is deeply flawed. So we need to create a new narrative about the value, about the purpose of the economy, which demands that the economic policy is embedded in the boundaries of the society environment and not the other way around. And so that in practical terms, that means, you know, we need to work with academics, people on the ground, policymakers, civil society organizations, to, and industry, of course, to understand the purpose of the economy, but also how to understand how the public authorities, how the authorities and the regulators, can help shape a just transition. So, for instance, the role of central banks beyond their traditional activities of, financial stability and financial and price stability is being discussed a lot right now. How we can integrate the new challenges of today, like the environmental issues, the social issues, and how we can, integrate them into the fiscal policy issues of governments, or the digital currencies, how that can help reduce inequalities. So, long story short, businesses are part of our everyday life and are a great force for good. But since the Paris Agreement in 2015, we had 4 trillion euros going into fossil fuel in 7 years. So we also have to change the financial sector, but also they can't do this alone. We need to change the broader economic system. So, we can actually, we know where we're going, we know which direction we go. We need just to accelerate this transition so it can be fair and just. So that's it for me, and I really just look forward to the conversation right now.
Thank you, Cédric. Thanks a lot. Really, I think your contribution really completes the broader picture. Well, it is quite a complex picture because, in fact, it depends on many variables. But it really seems to me now, from what that you have been saying and we have been listening, that all these variables need to act together. They need to really take the flight in a way, or like, first of all, act upon their conviction that change is necessary and urgent. Nobody, we have heard it already, no actors can be achieving this change alone, and it seems to me that a real concert is necessary in order to move on, to progress in terms of, at the systemic level. While encouraging again our attendants to ask their questions through the chat, but also maybe if you would like to raise your hand and ask the question yourselves. Yes, I see already one first question. Yeah, I would like to open the debate, open this discussion, yeah, by really starting from what you have said about the conditions for a dialogue. So it really seems that a real conversation is needed to help all these different actors change their attitude, their approach, understand not only the challenges, but also the possibilities. It really seems to me that once this conscience is changed, once this awareness is transformed, then new steps are possible. So I would like to open the question exactly by addressing the one asked by Mr. David Bruna to Enrique Meroño about the proposal on a consensus for a new language that generates real change, and the environmental social governance model, which was very interesting. But he would like to ask, what are the main resistances of company to being part of that consensus, or assuming the ESG model? How do you see that it is possible to overcome these resistances? And this is actually really also what I would like to start from, by opening the debate. So we understand the opportunity for a dialogue, but exactly, there are resistances within the economy, but also outside in terms of enabling systemic conditions. So let's tackle this problem, and then we hope to see how to overcome it. So Enrique, and then whoever would like to join.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for the question. Yes, probably this is one of the most important issues that we are facing, and it's related to different variables that are working together. But it's very much aligned from a business perspective. It's related to the revenue streams. So, you know, in certain cases, you need to change. You know, you need major change in your structure of business in order to tackle these new requirements. So, you know, you need time to do that. And you are trying to gain time, you know, creating some noise in the scenario, or trying to, you know, I'm going to make an example, for example, because it's something to understand. Everybody's going to understand that. For example, if you are our OEM I don't want to talk about my own sector because sometimes it could be a little bit dangerous. But talking, for example, about you know, the transport sector, and talking about electric vehicles. If you are, you know, have a big, you know, a big amount of money that you are earning is related to R&D of combustion engine vehicles, and you are selling your engines to other companies. Electric vehicles is not a good, it's not a good, you know, it's not good for your business in the short term. And during the time that you need to change things, you can be in favor of the change, but during this process, you have shareholders, you have pressures of the markets that are asking you for more revenues. You have pressures also or impacts in jobs and employments because you are going to you need to cut certain kind of activities of line of production in order to create new ones. So this is a very complex activity which involves a lot of different players, even in your own company. So that's why there are some resistance, because the position of all the companies are not the same. So the companies are not all, it's like people. People are not in the same situation in life, and they are not doing exactly the same things and supporting exactly the same things. It happens exactly the same with companies. And this is part of the resistances that I was talking about. And how we have to overcome that? I think with a mix of actions. In certain countries, they talk a lot about what they call fair transition, which is something that involves not just, you know, the business have to pay for everything and the government has to push the business to. It's like to try to diminish the impact in all the players as much as we can. In our case, we try to do our best in our situation, but we need, because in our case we have a part of our business is regulated, so it's linked to the decision of the governments in order to perform certain kind of supports. But the idea here is basically try to balance the burden between all the players, assuming that you need to accept certain kind of burden yourself. I think this is the best way to do that, because you are trying to harmonize the problem between all the parties involved. This is from my point of view, this is the best way to tackle this situation. And for me, that's it.
Thanks, Enrique. Does any one of the other speakers would like to address that question, which is, I think, a very crucial question? So Cédric, Josiane, Edmond, would you also like to discuss the point of the resistances? What are the resistances you see, and how would you propose to overcome them? in terms of messages, so the advocacy you can do, and also what you mentioned, Cédric, about a new narrative. Yes, please go ahead, Cédric.
Well, I think the industry or the sectors is not homogenic. So you have the Iberdrolas of this world that will lead as well. They lead the sector, push messages and actions, and you have other actors that will do absolutely nothing, and others that will push for messages, commitments, green commitments, social commitment. We've seen that with the COP26, with the Green Financial Alliance, the Glasgow Financial Alliance, GFANZ in Glasgow, where 130 trillion euros of asset managers committed to net zero. But then in terms of the action, you need to have people that are looking at those transition plans to make sure that all the companies, all the investors are actually doing what it's saying. Otherwise, this greenwashing issues we're going to create a precedent. And so I think we are in a moment now where so regulators are stepping up. There's more data. The regulators are stepping up to understand who is doing what. And at the same time, NGOs are saying, oh, there's legal action that we can be taking at some point, climate litigation issues. So I think businesses are now in a turning point right now with the COP26, with the commitments, the climate laws in many, many different countries, including in Europe, where there's legal action that is needed. There's frameworks, there are industry consensus, industry regulation coming in with the Fit for 55 in Europe. There's a lot of things happening. I think it's just a question of how you regulate that and you hold industry and investors to account.
Thank you. So the accountability aspect of this issue, which is growing more and more in importance. I would like to give the floor to Edmond, who asked for the mic, and then we have a few questions who have arrived. So Edmond, please go ahead.
Yeah, the event in the European Parliament a few years ago had these various companies, and they're all, kind of constitutionally committed to an friendly environment, and to really working towards the whole sort of green vision. But one of the things, they'd never met one another before, and they were all involved in totally different areas. So, there's no environmental lobby, but I mean, there are environmentally committed companies. And I just wonder, I mean, we're talking from way outside the world of business here, but I wonder, is there some way of kind of harnessing a voice which is not just one individual voice, say like Iberdrola that we're hearing today, but that there should be a lobby of environmental companies. And I think it wouldn't be easy, because I know the greenwashing thing kind of can seep in anywhere, but I do think that there needs to be a voice that would really do more than any other group to delegitimize the kind of the resistance that is there.
Thank you, Edmond. Josiane, you've also asked for the floor.
Yes, just because I see that the time is running out, so I'll just sneak in a comment maybe, which I think just to complete the other interventions, because we see that from our little experiment here, how useful it is to have different perspectives and voices listened to in a calm and in a respectful way, and to try to let that seep in. And I think that there are not enough spaces where this is actually happening. I think there's a lot of people listening to themselves in vacuums, and that this is going on in parallel in many different types of spaces. And this is unfortunate, because it only reinforces fixed positions, and it's not helping at all with the connection. And you see it in the big spaces, whether it's the COP or other areas where you have decision makers together, you have civil society together, you have everybody is separate from each other, and it's impossible to get the right kind of diversity of ideas and creativity to find the solution. Because if we're all acknowledging that there's an urgency, that there's no choice but to act, then we have no choice but to sit down and find the solution together. And that solution cannot be about what's in my personal interest, but it's about saving, you know, what matters to us, and that's the future, and that's the earth. And if we could just go back to a value-based discussion at times, I have a feeling that maybe that could help in the narrative and in the conversation and take us out of the self-interest pushing, which is a logic that we fall into quite easily. The other concern I have was the fair transition, or the just transition was mentioned. And this is a very delicate situation, because it's perceived by some as being unfair, because it's fair to one group of people and it's not fair to the others. And why should I lose on the advantages that you have already gained from in the past, and now you realize are destructive to the planet? But what's happening to me? I don't get to grow. I don't get to have the kind of lifestyle that you've had a right to for so long. So this conversation also has to happen. We've seen this at the Glasgow conversation as well, the Glasgow COP, how unfair it felt to certain countries, certain parts of the world. So we need to have a much more open reflection, I think, about that, respectful of the differences, the differentiated responsibilities historically as well, and the different investments and capacities of different countries, and the sharing of knowledge. We cannot get greedy about knowledge and technology as well if we're looking to find a solution. So I think that there's a few things there that we know that if they were more solidarity based and actually intergenerational justice based, would actually cut through a lot of the resistance that we're seeing in many, many sectors.
Thank you, Josiane. I think really this is really the bottom line. We should all get to, and what you underlined about the importance of having such a dialogue where all the actors are listened to, and this is still not happening in so many instances. So thank you for that. I hope it really will help us reflect. I'm seeing time is going by, and I'm seeing that there are more questions in the chat, so we can address them. I also see that some of you have raised their hand, so can I probably formulate all these questions in the chat together? I will try to before giving the floor to those who have raised their hand. So there is one question mainly for Enrique and Cédric. A few days ago, we saw how Amazon shareholders rejected a proposal by the executive board to become greener through more sustainable packaging, which is more expensive. In a way, investors, shareholders, are the hidden decision makers in our society. We know about positions of politicians and of company boards, but the shareholder side of corporate governance is hardly public enough to face criticism and reputational risk. To what extent is this, in your view, a problem? And then we have the next question from Mr. Michael Belvedere, thanking for the webinar and Cédric's wise reference to greenwashing. He asks, in what way did we have a 4 trillion go into fossil fuels in 7 years and have many communities and provinces or the Jesuit removed any investment in the fossil fuel industry? And many universities have done so. So yes, this is the divestment movement which is being promoted. Yes, these are the questions so far. Would you like to address them?
Well, I've very little to say really about the divestment movement because I'm not qualified. I'm not qualified really in that area. I think the struggle for transition is, I think, on a number of levels. The first, on the level of the really ultimate level of what's the word I'm looking for? Of narrative. You know, the narrative that moves us beyond just the practicalities of profit to the fact that we are living within a structure that we need to care for. It's very simple, really. But that's number one. Number two, then, you do need various structures. You know, and there, my competence is very limited. So I leave it at that, since we are running out of time.
Thank you, Edmond. I would like to give the floor to Cédric and Enrique to respond to the previous questions as well.
Go ahead, Cedric. Don't worry.
You sure? You can go ahead. That's fine. Just on this 4 trillion, Michael. I mean, that's. I can send you the link. I think it's an article on CNBC I've seen. The most worrying bit about the 4 trillion is not the 4 trillion in absolute terms. It's the fact that from the 60 banks that have provided the 4 trillion, 33 have increased their share in lending. I think it's mostly lending, but also underwriting of securities, equity or debt. And that's a huge issue, right? Because 2 years ago, the International Energy Agency, IEA, has said that to meet the 1.5 degree or 2 degree, the Paris Agreement objectives, we need to stop investment in new oil and gas projects, all of them. Exactly. So we can continue operation, but we need to stop them. And that's the problem. And that's why we've, with a number of other foundation and philanthropy, we've created the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, which is an alliance of governments looking at to make sure that we can stop oil and gas completely on the supply side of things to the production of oil and gas. And we don't say, we need to phase out oil and gas from one day to another. We've seen the problem that created the Ukraine war and the cost of living impact of supply of oil and gas. But we need to find transition pathways for countries that have huge reserves of petrol oil and gas, that have big redistribution revenues to be replaced by. We also need to understand how the consumer countries are moving away from that. So I mean, it's a very complex issue, but what we don't want to is more increasing of investment into the oil and gas industry. Enrique, I don't know, maybe just one point on the engagement of the Amazons. That's an excellent point, because we are in the annual general meeting season. So every, they have all the season, all shareholders are meeting with the corporates at the moment to vote on resolutions. And we think we've done a lot of work on that engagement by the shareholders to the companies. I think that's crucial, and we need to have a long-term plan to understand how we can actually engage with shareholders. But I think we're talking about equity right now, right? And the equity, there's a lot of light into equity, but the fixed income part of it, I think, could be an interesting one, because there's a $135 trillion of fixed income out there, held by, I think, a very concentrated number of asset manager or institutional manager that think they don't have the rights because it's fixed income, so you don't have like voting shares, but you do have a lot of possibility to engage with the companies, understand how the transition plan works. It can maybe create new product like the sustainability linked bonds, create frameworks for credit rating agencies to make sure that they integrate environmental risk into the rating of their bonds. So it's not only about equity, which is an important part, and I think divestment is a failed engagement. We need to engage first before going into the divestment phase. So I'll stop there, but Enrique, sorry, just monopolizing all the floor here.
No problem at all. I'm going to be very brief because I am aware about the time. I think it's a very interesting question, and I think that from my point of view, investors are not a hidden decision maker. It's a pretty obvious decision maker a player as well. Obviously, they are not in the spotlight in the same way than companies, but in fact they are in a lot of different ways, and it's not that difficult to know what is the positioning of the big investment funds that you can find today, and everybody knows the names of this kind of. And in our case, let me say that the pressures are in the opposite side, but it depends also in the in the expectation about the expectation of the investors. In our case, I think that the position is pretty clear. And if you invest in Iberdrola, you know what you are investing in. But there's a lot of gray areas. And for sure, I completely agree that it's something what we should tackle in certain moment. But as a business, you know, it's very difficult to move forward from that point of view. That's all from my side.
Thanks, Cedric, and thanks, Enrique. Yeah, it is a very important question, you know, the responsibility of shareholders indeed. I'm also right now feeling that I really miss somebody in this conversation, and maybe in the future we should really take steps and do something to involve them. The affected communities. Where are the affected communities? Where are the rights holders? Where are the poor? Where are, you know, those who really have bore the brunt of the impact of you know, the operations of corporations? I think this is really somebody we should always keep in mind just as much, at least as much, or if not more, in fact, as we do about investors. Sorry for this little provocative digression. It's my own temperament and my own background as a human rights lawyer. So this is my proposal for the future, to include those communities in the conversation, because we are really realizing that everybody is needed, everybody is important, and it is really these different perspectives and needs that we need to bring into a dialogue altogether. Now, before closing this event, because we are reaching the time limit, I would like to give the floor to Peter Rožić, who had a question and raised his hand. So are you still interested in asking your question, Peter?
Thank you, Adriana, and thank you all for this wonderful conversation. Perhaps more a commentary, since we are at the end of the webinar. I was struck by the insistence of Josiane to talk about equal footing. And we talked about profit as a measure, not a goal. Edmund mentioned that as one of his principal theses. And then we talked a lot about shareholders. But I would like to bring in another actor that, besides the one that Adriana just mentioned, which are those that are affected, which is really small businesses. And sometimes small businesses too can be very dirty. I will give an example of a huge gas and oil company. And I think this might be interesting for Laudato Foundation, since you're so involved in this kind of work. So this big oil and gas, I cannot name it because I have inside information, a company are now seen as quite green. And the main actor actually, was their kids. Kids of the people on the board insisted so much that they need to go greener that they did, which is wonderful. And this energy comes from the tens of thousands of young people being there as activists. But what this company, and I think many other companies did, is that they relegated much of their work, dirty work, to really small companies that do drilling or other things. So the big companies who have big profits, they don't really are no longer held accountable for the actions, because on the surface, they are now greener and greener, but they still rely on those small companies so that the oil actually can be pumped out or produced in other ways. And what I understood is that very few people go after them. And I agree, of course, you cannot just go simply after them, because they will be losing jobs as well. So it's a complex story. But I think it's part of the actors now that we need to take a look at, because we still see that actually we produce much more oil than we did in the past. This is not diminishing. Perhaps for transport it is, but overall actually this is still growing. So it would just be an invitation to take a look at those two and tackle that issue. And to say that sometimes small actors actually have really huge footing, but they're not held accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much for your contribution. Yeah, I think today's conversation was just maybe an opening of a broader dialogue that we need to keep, bringing forward. We need to broaden it to different subjects, different actors and stakeholders in various respects that include the poor and the marginalized, but also those who are probably still invisibly responsible for the environmental and the social damage of operations. At this point, I would like to just thank all the speakers who have really wonderfully contributed to this exchange. I think it's been really a very enriching and provoking, thought-provoking discussion. The issue is not, of course, simple, but it deserves probably further attention and further deepening. So I really look forward to new opportunities whereby JESC and its partners and its interlocutors such as Iberdrola and the Laudato Foundation can again come together for new opportunities of dialogue, with more open interlocutors and even longer time at our disposal to address a number of questions. Today was probably the inauguration of such a process, and we hope to have been a useful landmark for this. I would like to then greet and say thanks to all the attendants, to all those who registered for the event. I would like to remind everyone that the recordings will be available in the near future so that you can actually share the link to your friends, your colleagues, and all those who would like to follow this debate again in the future. Let me just give you a closing remark, which is again drawn by Laudato Si as our main inspirational document when it comes to ecology. Laudato Si says that the gravity of the ecological crisis demands that we all look to the common good, embarking on a path of dialogue which demands patience, self-discipline, and generosity, always keeping in mind that realities are greater than ideas. I think today really exemplified this sentence. It really exemplified that dialogue takes patience and that reality is actually going beyond what we can imagine and anticipate. So with this word of humility as well, as Josiane said, dialoguing takes humility. So I would like to humbly thank you all and close this session. We hope to see you again in the near future. Thank you very much. It's been such a pleasure to work with you, and see you next time. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.